Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Well, we're back once again at the corner of truth and courage. This week, we're talking about biblical evangelism. I'm going through some of the material that I teach in a course. Again, last time I taught this, I was in Armenia, sharing this with some Christians in our church in England. There we had this one family, a remarkable family. In fact, both of them have PhDs in science. They could have given their life to making a lot of money. Seriously, they were educated, could have gotten a well-paid job. They were just wonderful members of our church, but God had called them to the mission field, and they went to Armenia. Not long ago, we were in Turkey ministering over there, and then we hopped over to Armenia and to speak their church and to their group. And so I'm going through some of this material that I've taught many, many times, biblical evangelism, how to share Christ with a lost person, but to do it in a way that will make a real convert, not a false convert, not someone who's going to just simply pray a prayer and say these magical potion words that will make them into a Christian because they prayed a prayer. Some people think that they are going to heaven because they prayed a prayer. They're going to heaven because they were baptized. They're going to heaven because they have their membership in the church, or their parents are Christians, and that they're Christians because they're born in America or Canada or Europe, and they're not Muslim, they're not Buddhist or whatever, so they must be going to heaven. Well, the Bible says in Matthew chapter 7, there's a wide gate and a narrow gate. The wide gate leads to destruction. The narrow gate leads to life. There's many who've entered into the gate of self-justification, of some kind of religion, maybe as well. I'm a Baptist, so I entered that gate, and that's going to make me get me to heaven because I'm a member of a Baptist church. They've not really understood about their sin and that their guilt, and they haven't humbled themselves. And so they haven't entered in the narrow gate yet. And they're sitting on the pews of churches, and even good churches. And you may be one of them. So listen carefully and understand how to truly get saved. So we're going through this thing that God has given us a tool of how to bring a person to the understanding that you're in trouble with God. You've broken God's law. And there's a journey. I call it the gospel wheel. So let me go through that real quickly with you here. The journey that a person goes through. So at first, when you start talking to a person about their sin, because that's the first place we start, you're a sinner. You are guilty. You were born guilty of sin. And you'll stand before God on the day of judgment, and he'll judge you according to his righteousness. And he's given us a tool, a measuring stick of his righteousness, and that's the 10 Commandments. And when we go through the 10 Commandments with someone, if they're honest, they will have to say, I've broken that, I've broken that, I've broken that one, I've broken this one, and I've broken them many, many, many times, if they're honest. But the problem is they're stuck in self-justification. So the gospel wheel is you got to deal first with their self-justification, because they're not going to readily accept that news. First, they're ignorant of it. Then they live in a delusion that they don't want to admit it. They deny it. And there's a refusal to accept that. And so we have to explain the bad news to them. How do we do that? We use the law. The law assigns guilt. Guilt needs to be registered and explained to them. You're guilty. You're not a good person. You're lying to yourself. In fact, I mentioned Proverbs chapter 20 here yesterday, but there's also in Proverbs chapter 20 about the sweet bread of deception. Who could ever imagine deception being sweet bread? I don't like being lied to. You don't like being lied to, but we lie to ourselves all the time. And we lie to ourselves about the truth. We don't want to accept the truth, and we want to accept the lie, and that becomes sweet. That's the sweet bread. It's self-deception. And we have to use the law to get them, to shift them from that, to understand the bad news. And our goal is to get them to accept the truth that they are sinners, that they have broken God's law. And if we've done that successfully, there should be a natural remorse there and the feeling of guilt. It's amazing when you go through this properly with people and you can see the moment that their eyes open up when they realize, what am I going to do? What am I going to say to God when I know and He knows I'm guilty? When you get them to that point, that wheel then turns to the point after remorse and guilt. They're now ready for mercy. They're ready for the rescue plan. Remember, I quoted yesterday John Wesley. He said, preach 90% the law and 10% the grace. Don't spend a lot of time there on the good news. Spend most of the time on the bad news. Let me illustrate this. Imagine you're at the doctor's office and he's got you sitting down. You know, he's run some tests and he's called you into his office and he's got bad news. Bob, I'm sorry, we got the results back from your test and we've confirmed you've got cancer. But, you know, we've got good news. And the good news is that we're going to be able to cut that out. What we're going to do, we're going to cut you from here to here, and we're going to come in with these instruments and all this kind of stuff, and you're going to be asleep. You're not going to know what's going on. And then we're going to get in there, and we're going to cut this thing out. Then we're going to shoot radiation at you there, and we're going to be doing this here and stuff like that. And you're going to be sitting there saying, can I have a second opinion here? I'm not quite sure. I'm feeling pretty good. What do you mean I got cancer? What do you mean? But let's say the doctor approaches you this way, and he says, hey, Bob, remember we had some tests, and I sent you over to this doctor, and they did this test as well and stuff. And so we're here today to explain to you what we found. Now, I want you to look over here, and he shows you all the evidence and all the tests that they've done. You can see the graphs, and you can see the pictures, and you can see this, and they're explaining to you, listen, this is terminal. If we don't do anything, you're not going to be alive for very long. And this is really bad. I'm sorry to tell you, but you need to know the truth. If they've spent, 30, 40, 50 minutes with you explaining to you all the data, all the information, and you don't really have any questions left, and then they tell you, but we've got good news. We can fix that next week. You're ready for it. That's how we need to present the gospel. We need to spend more time on explaining the bad news before we can explain the good news. That's often our problem, is that we're not explaining the bad news accurately. Once we've gone through the gospel wheel well enough, where we've gone through the bad news, they deal, then up comes their self-justification. We explain the law to them, and we do it in a manner that's right. They are feeling filled with guilt and remorse, and they're ready now for God's rescue plan. So when they're ready for that, and after we've explained these things, we're ready to give them the good news. But I've actually gotten ahead of myself. I want to go through the process. Let's go through a little bit of a process of how to explain, how to use the law and to overcome these things before we get into the rescue plan. And it starts off with a great question. Would you consider yourself to be a good person? And usually the common response is, when I've asked this many, many times, they're going to come back and say, yeah, absolutely, I'm a pretty good person. And then we ask them, so well, let's examine that to God's measuring stick by using the 10 Commandments. And most people say, well, no problem. I'm not going to have a problem with that. And so we begin with the first question. Have you ever told a lie? And kind of like it stops them right there. Well, I guess so, but who hasn't? And but it's important that you follow up with this question. What are you called if you tell lies? Well, they're not going to want to say this again. This is their self-justification, but we're circumnavigating around their justification. And if a person tells lies, what do you call it? Well, they're called a liar. Okay, well, we don't go very far, and you say, well, can you really talk to people this way? Absolutely. I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. And I've never had anyone upset with me. You're not doing it in a mean way. We're simply asking them questions that we've asked them if it's okay if we test what they said is true. Then we ask them another one. Have you ever taken something that didn't ever belong to you? Yeah, I guess so, but who hasn't, right? Self-justification. I'm just like everyone else. And so what are you called if you steal things? Well, a thief. They don't like it to admit that, but it's dawning on them. Well, I guess I'm a liar and I'm a thief. Another question. Now, if they come back and say, no. Well, remember earlier I asked you, have you ever told a lie? Are you sure you never told anything? And so, we don't press them hard, but we ask them these questions. Then we ask them, have you ever taken God's name in vain? This is another one of God's commandments. This is the third commandment. No, never. Well, hold on a minute. A minute ago, you told me you're a liar. Are you sure you've never said, okay, yes, I probably, said God's name in vain. And we tell them, well, taking God's name in vain is called blasphemy. That's a serious crime against God. So far, you've told me that you're a liar, a thief, and a blasphemer. What are you going to do on the day of judgment? When you stand before God on the day of judgment, do you think that he's going to find you guilty of these things? Will he find you guilty or innocent? And they have to admit, well, I guess you'll find me guilty. And then we ask, well, if God finds you guilty, will he send you to hell? Or will he look the other way and just let you into heaven? Now, you know what's interesting here? And we'll stop with this today because we're out of time. 95% tell me, well, he'll let me into heaven because I'm not a bad person. Isn't that interesting? They've admitted that I've broken God's commandments. But when I ask the question, if God finds them guilty of breaking the commandments, is he still going to let them into heaven? And their answer is yes. God's going to let me into heaven because I'm not a bad person. Oh, I hope you'll stay with us on this because tomorrow I want to follow up with this. It's not a good place for us to stop, but we have to. So join us again tomorrow at the corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you.
Hi, this is Gil Ford at Fortress of Faith. I think you will agree with me that the radio ministry of Fortress of Faith is a unique program. We often get calls to thank Tom for his way of bringing light and understanding to issues that are often dark, troubling, and confusing. It's a shame Fortress of Faith is not on more stations across the nation, but you can help to ensure it stays on your station if you will help us reach our goal for the spring fundraiser. We find that if we break a goal down in bite-sized chunks, it is more reachable. Our goal is to raise a total of $30,000, but let's break that down in two challenges. The first is to raise $15,000 in one-time gifts. The good news is that one donor has already given $1,000. The next challenge is to break down the other half in smaller bites by giving monthly donations from a card. Perhaps you could give $10 a month, or $25 or $50 a month, or even $100 a month. You can cancel at any time. You can give safely and securely online at fortressoffaith.org. That's fortressoffaith.org. Or call us at 800-616-0082. Again, that is 800-616-0082.